This is a divine appointment today, folks. To have Bill Salus. I don't know if I encourage you to look him up on YouTube. He's in a number of teachings. He was here Friday and gave an awesome message. He was here all day yesterday. You can go to our YouTube channel, Calvary Chapel of Hope, right? And all of the messages are there for you to look at. And Bill's teaching, I would just say it's a graduate level teaching on prophecy. You're really getting top of the line prophetic teaching and the opportunity for us to understand what's going on in the world. So when you go there, I'm so thankful that we have our YouTube channel set up now. But these are teachings that really you're going to end up listening to over and over and over again. So I encourage you to avail yourself with that. But Bill Salus, awesome teacher, and this morning he's going to be talking to us about some things that are likely right around the corner. Right around the corner. So with no further ado, Bill Salus. Let's give him a hearty Calvary Chapel welcome.
Thanks, Pastor Todd. Welcome, everybody. It's great to be here again. Ready to learn some Bible prophecy today? Okay. I'll start by telling you a story. A Christian university contacted a Bible prophecy expert to teach a class on Bible prophecy. And he opened the class by asking a question, an important question. He said, "Class, what are the two main problems within Christianity today when it comes to Bible prophecy?" And it was silence and no one responded. He said a letter, "Class, what are the two main problems within Christianity today when it comes to Bible prophecy?" It's still no response. So he looked in the back and there was a young man fidgeting with his cell phone, texting or something. He said, "You young man, put that cell phone down. What are the two main problems within Christianity when it comes to Bible prophecy?" And the young man put the cell phone down and he frustratedly said, "I don't know and I don't care." And he said, "Exactly, that's the two main problems in Bible prophecy. People don't know and they don't care." But J. Barton Payne, who wrote the Encyclopedia of Bible Prophecy, says that about 26.8% of the Bible is devoted toward predictive information. That's about 9,000 verses. Some commentators even put it up to as high as 10,000 verses. So God put all this information, predictive information, in there not to remind himself what he's supposed to do in the last days, but to let us know what we're supposed to do in the last days. All the end time signs are converging right now, which indicates that we are in the last days. So we've got things staged around. Ancient parchments are about to roll off their ancient prophecies about to roll off their parchments and pound down on the pavement, packing a powerful global punch. We're going to look at a very powerful one today, a couple of them today. So over the Friday night, one session, 3 sessions Saturday, we went from here to eternity. We looked at prophecies from now on through the tribulation, on through the millennial period, into forever. Now there's several thousand verses and hundreds of prophecies yet remaining unfulfilled, and they will lay themselves out in the last days, 12-stage timeline. We're in stage 1 right now, the church age. Jesus is going to come rapture us out of here. That will conclude the church age. That would be stage 2. Then we go into a post-rapture, pre-tribulation time gap, a period of unspecified length of time, because we don't immediately go into the tribulation, because it's not the rapture that starts the tribulation. It's a confirmation of a false covenant between an antichrist with Israel and another party. That would be stage 4. Then we go into the tribulation. Now, not we. I'm a pre-trib rapture believer. I believe Jesus is going to come get us out before the tribulation. We're not appointed to wrath. In fact, I'm so pre-trib I don't even buy Post Toasties or green bananas. I'll repeat that. That was supposed to be a joke. You're taking me so serious today. Then you have a midpoint, a lot of stuff going on in the midpoint. There's a war in heaven. Satan gets cast down to the earth with a third of the fallen angels. The Antichrist goes into the Jewish temple, which will be built at that time, and he desecrates it. Lots of stuff going on in the midpoint of the tribulation. Then you have the Great Tribulation, the second half, 3.5 years, 1,260 days. These are first half and the second half are compartmentalized for 3.5 years each period. It's called the Great Tribulation because that's the period of time when God pours his wrath out through the bowl judgments on a Christ-rejecting humanity. And you have the second coming when Jesus comes and rescues the faithful Jewish remnant, returns them back to the land of Israel, and he wages war and defeats the Antichrist and the Armageddonites, and the Antichrist gets cast into the lake of fire. That would be stage 8. Then there's a 75-day interval period, getting ready for the millennium, where Jesus Christ has to sort of mop up the mess of all the judgments that happened on the earth. He's got to restore the earth. It's been destroyed. Yes, folks, this earth has an expiration date. Then you have a 1,000-year Messianic kingdom, a millennium. Then you have an aftermath age when all the unbelievers will be resurrected for a white throne judgment. And because they did not believe in Jesus Christ, they will be judged at the white throne judgment and cast into the lake of fire. And you have an eternal order, which is really wonderful, and a new Jerusalem. And if you're a believer in here today, your eternal future is extremely bright. So how we laid this out was the church age. We have the now and next prophecies book, the first half of the tribulation, the last prophecies book, and the second half of the tribulation, the final prophecies, and then the millennium prophecies in the New Jerusalem to take you through stages 9 through 12. So if you want to know how to get from here to eternity, now you can, what your future holds for you. Today I'm going to be talking about the Ezekiel 38, when God defends Israel, the coming Russian-Iranian invasion of the Promised Land. This is stage setting presently. I think it's very timely that we talk about this. I'm going to go ahead and play my trailer on this. Sanjay, for some reason I can't get my notes on this thing. Is there a way to fix that real quick? Excuse us. Hit escape?
Yeah, escape. Yeah. Is that okay?
Well, yeah, we need to find out how I can get my notes to show on the right.
Oh. You want this?
Oh, yeah, I'm in that one.
You want that one?
Yeah. Well, I'm in the. Oh, you're seeing the show up there, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm in the presentation.
This.
So I'm gonna. So if I go right here, it's the slide I was just on. Slideshow from current slide. Okay, there we go.
You got it?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Call on Sanjay, the high-tech guy. Yeah. Hey, Sanjay, thank you. Okay, so Ezekiel 38. Now I'm going to play the trailer on this DVD. It's a 3-disc DVD because it sets the stage and the groundwork for what I'm going to be talking about. Okay, the video's coming if we have volume.
According to an ancient prophecy found in the book of Ezekiel, the God of the Bible is going to put the world on official notice that He is the one true God.
The prophet writes, "And in that day I will make my holy name known in the midst of my people Israel. And the nations shall know that I am the Lord, the Holy One in Israel."
Ezekiel foretells that in the last days, Russia, Turkey, Iran, and 6 other member nations will invade Israel from the far parts of the north. They are coming down to conquer Israel and take over its plunder and great booty. But the Lord, not America nor the Israeli Defense Forces, but the Lord, stops these invaders supernaturally with a great earthquake, pestilence, and bloodshed, flooding rains, great hailstones, and fire and brimstone. Ezekiel chapters 38 and 39 provide every aspect of this foretold event. The stage is set, the prophecy is ready to happen, and now you can discover every detail and prepare yourself for this soon coming, powerful event. Now available, one of the most comprehensive videos ever produced on this topic, a 3-disc DVD produced by Prophecy Watchers TV, featuring Bill Salus and Mondo Gonzalez. This timely DVD is entitled Ezekiel 38, When God Defends Israel, the Coming Russian-Iranian-Led Invasion of the Promised Land, and it explains every facet of the Ezekiel 38 and 39 foretellings. You will discover the coming greater and safer Israel that someday dwells securely without walls, bars, or gates, the timing, setting, and location of the Russian-Iranian-led invasion, the identity of the invaders, the motives of these attackers, the supernatural victory by the Lord, and the aftermath period when Israel buries the dead armies and converts their weapons into energy. You will learn all this and much, much more from the Ezekiel 38 When God Defends Israel 3-disc DVD.
We're going to put ourselves on the end times line. Where are we presently? We're between two end times marquee events. The first one is past. 1948 was the rebirth of the nation of Israel and fulfillment of many prophecies. Israel is not an accident of history. It was foretold the Jews would be brought back in their land. That happened on May 14th, 1948. And we're racing towards this other marquee event that we're going to be talking about tonight, the Gog and Magog War, the Ezekiel 38 prophecy, because this is the event that God is going to put the world on official notice that He is the one true God, the covenant-keeping God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the promise-keeping God of those who put their faith in Jesus Christ. And here's what it says: So I will make my holy name known in the midst of my people Israel, and I will not let them profane my holy name anymore. And the nations shall know that I am the Lord, the Holy One. In Israel, it requires that there be my people Israel existing. Hitler could not commit complete genocide. The Jewish people had to be alive to be in Israel. And it says the Holy One in Israel, the land of Israel. The land of Israel had to be restored to my people Israel to live there, the chosen people and the promised land. And these are two integral parts of the Abrahamic covenant, the unconditional Abrahamic covenant. So God is choosing this marquee event to make the world know He is God. So where are we now? We're racing forward toward the Gog and Magog invasion. We see the stage is being set. We're 74 years closer. But I've got a question mark between 2022 and 2000 question mark, because we don't know exactly when Ezekiel 38 is going to happen. We have a lot of specific details, but we don't know exactly when it's going to happen. But I think there's some things that need to happen in advance to set the stage for the Ezekiel 38 Gog and Magog war. And these things we talked about over the weekend, Friday and Saturday. There's going to be a nuclear disaster in Iran, a destruction of Damascus, a toppling of Jordan, a terrorization of Egypt, an Arab-Israeli war of Psalm 83. An exceedingly great Israeli army will emerge. Israel will expand territorially, and it will become a greater and safer Israel. Also, somewhere in, on, or before all of these prophecies, pre-tribulation prophecies, there will be a rapture. And that could happen at any time. It's an imminent event. There are no signs, no prophecies that have to find fulfillment in advance. So at any given point, the rapture could happen. Today we're going to be talking about the Russian invasion of Israel and the decline of America through this Ezekiel 38 DVD. So as we look at Ezekiel 38, the first thing we need to realize is that because it's such an important event to the Lord that He's going to use to make His holy name known, He gave us 52 verses in Ezekiel 38 and 39 that are very descriptive. You can read them literally. You don't need to allegorize or spiritualize this prophecy. He wants us to understand all the details. On the trailer, it showed you everything that He's going to talk about, who's involved, what the motives is, what's Israel's condition in at the time, what happens in the aftermath, how the invaders are defeated. So He's very specific on this prophecy. It's probably one of the most detailed biblical prophecies in the Bible. So we have 15 participants listed in Ezekiel 38. You have the victor, who will be God supernaturally. You have the intended victim, which is Israel. You have these invaders by their ancient names: Magog, Rosh, Meshech, Tubal. Persia will put a face on their modern day identities today. Then you have these protesters on the sidelines: Sheba, Dedan, the merchants of Tarshish, and their young lions. And today I'll be giving you the archaeological, biblical, historical, geographical, and geopolitical reasons why I think the merchants of Tarshish are the UK, and among their young lions would be the USA. But who are the Magog invaders? You see the list of their ancient names on their modern day equivalents on that map. To the left, we could see who the general consensus of the scholars is, who these invaders are. It's a coalition Russia puts together. Russia is at the head of it. Gog of Magog, Gog would be the leader. It's a title for like a chief, a prince, or a president, or a leader. So you have Russia and the southern steppes of Russia. You have the Stans, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, etc., probably involved. Turkey, Iran, Ethiopia, Sudan, Somalia, Libya, Algeria, Tunisia. Honorable mentions probably go to Morocco and Germany. They could also be involved. Most all of these are Muslim countries except Russia. Here's another look at them. They form what I call an outer ring of countries. They don't share common borders with Israel. They have never been Israel's notorious enemies, but they will come against Israel in a massive coalition. In the latter days, you're going to find out. I compare this to an inner circle of countries that are involved in a different prophecy called Psalm 83. And you see that they're listed in their ancient names on their modern day equivalents. And these are the ones who have been Israel's notorious Arab enemies from time immemorial. They share common borders with Israel. They're not listed in Ezekiel 38, so I'm going to show you a comparison again, but I want you to be clear there's an inner circle of countries in a separate prophecy, Psalm 83, and an outer ring of countries in the Ezekiel 38 prophecy. Now, Ezekiel 38 is definitely stage setting. We see the national relationships between Russia, Turkey, and Iran. Some of the leaders in this coalition have never been stronger. They've been solidified more and more during the 10-year Syrian revolution because they all had interests in what was going on in Syria. As a matter of fact, they've met several times together in Sochi, Russia in 2017, Turkey in 2018, Tehran in 2018, and then recently in February in Sochi, Russia, just 10 days before Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine. Also, Russia has contracts with Iran to build two additional. They've already helped them build one Bushehr nuclear reactor in the west part of Iran. They got contracts to build two more, Bushehr 2 and Bushehr 3. They helped them build Bushehr 1 already. It's already operable. In the negotiations going on in Vienna, trying to get what's called the JCPOA, the peace plan that was put together by Obama with Iran, so they would curb down their nuclear program, which Donald Trump withdrew us from in 2018. Those peace talks are stalled. They're probably going to fail. But should they even come through, Russia has been guaranteed they can get $10 billion out of the sanctions to build these nuclear power plants. So the point I'm trying to make is these relationships are coming together right now. And they're not going to be separated. It doesn't look like they would be separated. So I'm going to show you a few parallels between the current Russian invasion of Ukraine with the Ezekiel 38 prophecy invasion of Israel. So Vladimir Putin went in on February 24th, just 4 days after the Olympics. He was mounting his troops around the borders of Ukraine during the Olympics. Everybody suspected after the Olympics he would invade. Apparently he had a gentleman, or should I say a communist dictator handshake with the president of China, Xi Jinping. But 4 days after the Olympics, he went into invaded Ukraine. So what we have is that we have a Russian president in the latter days, these are the latter days, invading, getting thoughts, devising an evil plan to invade a country. And, you know, he says he invaded because they're trying to keep the West from coming closer to Russia, the NATO countries. But he also had an ulterior motive, it appears, because Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe. It's the second largest in gas reserves in Europe, although most of those are untapped. It's the fifth largest producer of corn. And Russia and Ukraine account for a fourth of the world's wheat that gets exported out there. Now, the war with Ukraine is going into its third month. It's already been 3 months. And Russia's plans are being thwarted. They're still trying to take over Ukraine, but they've failed miserably in trying to take over Kiev and a couple other cities. So I'm going to show you some parallels because Ezekiel 38, which involves a Russian leader, Gog, forms an evil plan, we're told. Thus says the Lord God, in that day, in the latter days, it shall come to pass that thoughts will arise in your mind, and you will make an evil plan. You will say, I will go against the land of unwalled villages. I will go to a peaceful people who dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls and having neither bars nor gates. So far we have a Russian leader in the end times. You're going to see pictures of Vladimir Putin up here. Now, I'm not saying Vladimir Putin is Gog, Magog, although he could be. But some say he's got terminal cancer and he's suffering from Parkinson's, so he may not be the Gog. But some Russian leader, whether it's Vladimir Putin or not, will get an evil thoughts, an evil plan, and they're going to go to invade Israel at a time when they're dwelling safely without walls, bars, nor gates, to take great plunder, to take gain. Like Ukraine is a breadbasket of Europe, Israel is going to have a great prosperity when this happens. And Russia and their coalition want to get part of that. For some reason, their economies will need that. In fact, presently, Israel has been contracted by Europe because of the sanctions and the things that Russia has stopped sending gas into Europe and oil and gas into Europe. They've contracted Israel within a month ago to start sending gas into Europe. So Israel is already becoming an exporter of gas into Europe. He's going to come to take plunder, to take booty, to stretch his hand against the waste places that are again inhabited, and against the people gathered from the nations, who have acquired livestock and goods, who dwell in the midst of the land. Now, we read all those countries that are involved in this invasion. Now, Russia's just invading Ukraine on their own. They're not putting a coalition together. But for some reason, they were going to invade Israel with 9 different populations. The question I would ask is, why does Russia need to form such a massive coalition to invade little tiny Israel? You see a map up there of New Jersey with the red star pulsing on it. That's the size of modern day Israel right now, about the size of New Jersey. It would be almost like if I'll use Joe Biden because he's the current president, if Biden said, we need to go take over New Jersey, they're getting out of hand. Just using an example here. I live in California, so I don't know what the scenarios and intentions are on the East Coast here. But it'd be like saying, let's get Canada and Mexico and all the rest of the United States to come against New Jersey. It seems like overkill to me. We're going to answer that question shortly, but basically, presently, if that coalition was to come together, they'd be able to muster up about 2,591,000 troops to go against Israel that's only got about 176,500. Again, why such a formidable coalition? Is something changed in the future that Russia would need to have a lot more help? Now, before the Ezekiel 38 and 39 prophecy can find fulfillment, Israel has to be dwelling in certain conditions. And we're going to look to see if they dwell in these conditions, because if they don't, the prophecy can't find fulfillment until they do. We're told in Ezekiel 38, 7 through 12, that they will be regathered from the nations in the latter years. They'll be brought back from the sword of persecution into Israel, into a land which had long been desolate. And we're going to say, well, check mark, those things are happening right now. We're watching this unfold over the last 74 years. The Jews are being regathered in the land still. But these other conditions have to be in place. They have to be a peaceful people, living in a land of unwalled villages, dwelling securely without walls, bars, nor gates, having silver and gold and acquired livestock and goods, possessing booty and great plunder, because that's what Russia and their hordes are coming for, Israel's livelihood. So we have to ask ourselves, is Israel dwelling without walls, bars, nor gates, living in unwalled villages? The answer to that question is no. They have a 403-mile wall coursing through Israel proper. At some points it's 20 feet high, filled with concrete, trying to keep Palestinian terror out of Israel proper. That's a major wall running right down through the center of Israel. They also have been building walls to the north. Here's an article in Times of Israel in September of 2018. It's a 30-foot tall border wall that goes up. The Israeli Defense Forces says that Hezbollah and the Lebanese army are colluding, and the article goes on to say, the Israeli military this week publicly unveiled its 11-kilometer-long, 9-meter-tall concrete border wall along the Lebanese border, which would be 7 miles long and about 29 feet high. The concrete barrier is designed to serve 2 main functions: to protect Israeli civilians and soldiers from sniper attacks and prevent infiltration into Israel by Hezbollah operatives. Hezbollah is up to the north of Israel and Lebanon, and they have 150,000 missiles, some precision-guided, pointed at Israel. They got those from Iran over the course of the last decade or so. Now, this was the reason in the old times, the ancient times, they used to build walls to prevent infiltration from invaders into a country. Now, some of you may know that Hezbollah was actually trying to dig tunnels underneath these walls to come in so they could launch a ground invasion into Israel. They hate Israel, and they're a proxy of Iran. There's also other walls to the north in Lebanon. There's one built around Metula, 2012. They've also got fences along the eastern side with Jordan, and they have a peace treaty. It's fragile with Jordan, but they feel the need to build a wall there as well. Matter of fact, the Middle East is the most fenced-in and fortified region in the world. You see the existing walls and some proposed. But if you look, Israel is actually the most fenced in and fortified nation in the Middle East. So they're not dwelling without walls, they're not dwelling securely. And we're told 2 times in Ezekiel 38, verses 8 and verse 11, that they need to be dwelling safely, they need to be dwelling securely in a land of unwalled villages. The Hebrew word is yeshav-v'tak, and it means a security, ability to dwell safely because your military has accomplished a victory, and now you don't have to worry about your enemies, infiltrators. That's what Ezekiel's content would be in the Hebrew translation. So if Israel's not dwelling securely without walls, bars, nor gates presently, when will they? Because until that time, this Ezekiel 38 prophecy won't find fulfillment. Well, fortunately, Ezekiel tells us when they will. We go back 10 chapters to Ezekiel 28, verses 24 through 26. And here's what he says. Thus says the Lord God, when I have gathered the house of Israel from the peoples among whom they are scattered, and am hallowed in them in the sight of the Gentiles, and they will dwell in their own land, when I gave to my servant Jacob, and they will dwell safely, yeshav-v'tak. They will build houses and plant vineyards. Yes, they will dwell securely, yeshav-v'tak. When I execute judgments on all those around them who despise them, then they shall know that I am the Lord their God. So he also uses the word 2 times here. They will dwell securely when judgments are executed on those around them who despise them. It won't be diplomacy. It will be judgments executed through military. We have to ask ourselves, are there people around Israel who despise them who will need judgments executed upon them? And they're all around there. They're in the inner ring of Psalm 83. They're not in Ezekiel 38. They're seem to be intentionally omitted from Ezekiel 38. Now, if you were watching my talks over the weekend, you'll see how I talked about all the different judgments that are going to come upon these people around them who despise them. And that would be through the broader prophecy of Psalm 83. We talked about who the Magog coalition is, what their motives is, what condition Israel must be dwelling in when this prophecy finds fulfillment. But there's these other participants standing on the sidelines, these spectators. We're told in Ezekiel 38:13, Sheba Dedan, the merchants of Tarshish, and all their young lions will say to you, meaning to the Russian leader in the Russian coalition, have you come to take plunder? Have you gathered your army to take booty, to carry away gold, to take away great plunder? Which was another reason we understand the motive of the invaders. They're coming into Israel to confiscate its livelihood, its plunder and booty. So let's try to figure out who the young lions of Tarshish are. So let me go back to the slide. You'll see on the bottom of this past slide, Sheba down on the bottom would be where Yemen is. Dedan would be in Saudi Arabia. Some people say that could even go forward to the Persian Gulf, where you have the Gulf Cooperation Arab States of Kuwait, Oman, UAE, Bahrain, Qatar. Saudi Arabia is among them. So it could include even those Arab countries, but it definitely includes Saudi Arabia. But what we need to figure out is who's Tarshish. Where is Tarshish? The theory on that, there's 2 main theories on who Tarshish is and their young lions. One of the theories is that Tarshish is Spain, and the young lions would come out from the loins of Spain, would be the colonies in South America, the Latino countries. And they say that this is dealing with Tartessus. That's the word they gravitate to. I've studied this teaching, and I'll tell you why I don't think it's going to hold up when you see what I'm going to present to you. But Tartessus is really, in Greek mythological writing, not even clear whether it's a city, a river, or a nation. So you're going to see that Tartessus, you should study this, but that it really doesn't seem to be Spain is involved at all, and the Latino countries are not involved in this prophecy. The other theory is that Tarshish is the UK, and the young villages or lions that came out from them would have been the colonies, including North America, Canada, United States, Australia, etc. And we're going to see that that is more than likely who is who in this prophecy. But regardless, it's the merchants of Tarshish, not the athletes, not the politicians, not the musicians per se, entertainers. It's the merchants. These are people standing on the sidelines, can't fight against Russia, and they've got commercial interests at stake. And Russia's coming along trying to deprive them of their commercial interests. So they're very concerned. They're barking on the sidelines going, what are you doing, Russia? So let's see if we can pinpoint who these Tarshish is and their young lions. Let's look at who is Tarshish in the Bible. The location of Tarshish. We're told in Genesis 10, And the sons of Javan, Elisha, and Tarshish, Kittim, and Dodanim. By these were the isles, the islands of the Gentiles divided in their lands, everyone after his tongue, and their families and their nations. There's a picture of the British Isles. The Isles of Tarshish show up in 4 other verses. Now the British Isles are a group of islands in the North Atlantic. They include Britain, Ireland, Isle of Man, etc. There's 6,000 smaller islands. About 136 are permanently inhabited. Spain is not really known for islands per se. They're connected to the European continent up there. So far we're saying, hey, maybe it's the British Isles as the location. But how do we know what direction we should go? Well, Jonah gave us a real clue that Tarshish was far to the west of Israel, because you know the story about Jonah and the whale. He was told by God to go give a judgment message to the Assyrian Empire, which would have been to his north and east, but instead he boarded a ship at Joppa and was going to go entirely in the other direction. He didn't want to have anything to do with those barbaric Assyrians. You know the story. He was rerouted and was followed by a whale. Ultimately, he went to Nineveh and preached that judgment, warning to them, and they repented, and God relented in Assyria. But the point being is that Tarshish, so he paid his fare thereof and went down to them, to Tarshish, to flee from the presence of the Lord. And you see that as far west as he could go. We also have a clue in the Psalms that Tarshish is far west of Israel. It says, thou breakest the ships of Tarshish with an east wind. So if the ships were coming from the west, an east wind would break them, slow them down. Okay? So we're realizing it's islands. We're realizing it's far to the west. So some archaeologists say it's beyond the Gibraltar. There's another term for that. The Gibraltar connects the Atlantic to the Mediterranean. You see the map up there. So far beyond that, you go up to the British Isles up there. I believe that would be Tarshish. Bible prophecy scholar Mark Hitchcock writes in his late great United States book, some archaeologists believe that Tarshish was the ancient name of Britain. Tarshish can also mean beyond Gibraltar, depending on your translation. Tarshish and her villages or young lions, in other words, would be Britain, which then settled Canada, the United States, and Australia. So we're looking at the location. We're realizing that Tarshish is islands. But what was Tarshish known for? The Bible gives us a lot of clues on that. Tarshish was a merchant. We're told in Ezekiel 27:12, Tarshish was thy Tyre, that would be Lebanon, a merchant, by reason of the multitude of all kinds of riches, which included, now get this, silver, iron, tin, lead, and they traded in thy fairs. So merchants, the theme of Tarshish is listed 7 times in the Bible. Now they also not just had a lot of those minerals, silver, iron, tin, and lead, but they also had ships that could cart that cargo for long distances. Ships of Tarshish show up 9 times in the Bible. The ships of Tarshish did sing of thee in thy market, and thou was replenished, and very good, very glorious in the midst of the seas. So they were known for their seaworthy ships that could go long distances for a long period of time, carrying lots of merchandise, including those metals up there. Now, I write this in my Now Prophecies book. About 587 BC, Ezekiel acknowledged that tin was among the primary metals that came from Tarshish. Cornwall, a county on England's rugged southern western tip, was the only major source of tin in Europe for the past 2,500 years. It's also true that the mountains of Wales, just north of Cornwall, have been a source of all the minerals and metals listed above in Ezekiel 27:12. The Heidelberg University did a study in September 2019 called The Enigma of Bronze Age Tin. They examined Bronze Age tin from the 2nd millennium BC from Israel, Turkey, and Greece. And they concluded that the tin artifacts from Israel, for example, largely match tin from Cornwall and Devon in Great Britain. So we have the materials, the location, the island setting. So far we're starting to understand that this is probably dealing over there with the British Isles as Tarshish. J.R. Church, a Bible prophecy teacher who has since passed on to be with the Lord, wrote in the Guardians of the Grail book, an inscription discovered in 1780 on a cliff above Mount Hope Bay in Bristol, Rhode Island, contained an engraving that read, "Voyagers from Tarshish, this stone proclaims." It's believed to be inscribed around 533 BC. Harvard University has found 5 locations within the United States where the merchants of Tarshish had colonies. So the evidence is certainly weighing more and more toward the UK as Tarshish versus Spain. Now, we looked at the archaeological, historical, biblical, geographical aspects. Let's look at the geopolitical aspects that also argue in favor of Tarshish and their young lions being UK and America. So there was once upon a time, it was said that the British Empire was the empire in which the sun never set. In 1922, they had sovereignty over 458 million people. You see that in the red-colored maps up there, which is about a fifth of the world's population. They were a powerful empire. They had control over 13 million square miles, which is about a fourth of the earth. So the sun would rise in the east. By the time it set, the British Empire had control over all that land as you see it there. Now, here's a poster during World War I, because the British Empire was involved in that, and they defeated the Ottoman Empire that had reigned over the Middle East for 400 years. And here's what the poster says. Young lions, they're enlisting the young lions. They listed Australia, Canada, India, New Zealand, and listed the old lion. You see this as a poster. So they were calling themselves the old lion and enlisting the young lions to engage with them in the World War I. Now, you don't see America listed there, but remember, America broke off from the UK and the British Empire in 1776. But they were still a young lion that came out of the British Empire back when. So after World War I, we looked to see who got involved in the Middle East scenario. You had Syria, you see up there in brown. The French took care of that, had control over that. UK, or say Tarshish, they were in control of what is modern-day Israel and Jordan, parts of Saudi Arabia and much of Iraq. So it was France. Now what happened is there was dissension coming among the Arabs with the French and the British, so they started relinquishing land to the Egypt became a nation in 1922, restored. Saudi Arabia and Iraq, 1932, Iran, which was formerly called Persia, 1935. Lebanon, 1943, Syria and Jordan, 1946, and Israel in 1948. So they relinquished their holds there, but they were in control of that area in modern history. So now Spain was not involved in any of that. So again, we're going to sort of push Spain further and further away from the equation and lean heavily more and more on the UK as Tarshish. Now, the colossal mistake that the UK made after winning World War I, they came out in 1917 with what's called the Balfour Declaration, which was ratified a few years later at the San Remo Conference, which was going to give restore Israel and let the Jews come out of the nations of the world and come back into their homeland. But because the Arab states had said, they agonized over that. They said, we helped you win World War I. You have to be beholding to us. Do not let Israel become a nation. So because I believe they were supposed to let Israel become a nation, but because they didn't do that, didn't do what God's sovereign plan was, they subjected 6 million Jews to World War II and extermination in the Holocaust. Now you'll find that the sun, over 70 years, always sets on the British Empire. They lost everything. The empire in which the sun never set. Okay, so Great Britain presently has about 94,000 square miles and about 66 million people. They fell apart as they did not do what God wanted them to do with their sovereign purposes, in my estimation. But while they were declining, who was emerging? The young lions of America, in my estimation. We see we've been involved in the Middle East, not Spain. America's been involved in trying to broker peace deals. Jimmy Carter in 1979, peace treaty between Egypt and Israel. Bill Clinton, fragile peace treaty between Jordan and Israel. So we've been involved in that. But here's the question. If we're in this prophecy, you can see why the UK at this point in time would not be able to fight against Russia and all those troops. But America's been the number one superpower, the greatest superpower that ever lived. Why are we also standing on the sidelines barking at this invasion, not helping Israel like a cowardly young lion? It pictures us in a less than superpower status, if that's us. Well, America has been in the danger zone for over 60 years. We've given God his walking papers. I'm going to show you a few Supreme Court decisions which makes it real clear. We said, God, we don't need you anymore in our schools for our children. We don't need you anymore to help us run this country. You have a Supreme Court decision in 1962, Engel versus Vital, the removal of prayers in public schools. God, we don't want our children praying to you in public schools anymore. Keep that at home with the parents. The next year, Abington School District versus Shemp, the removal of Bible reading in the public schools. They used to read the Bibles in the public schools. Some of you may remember that. Now, that was when John F. Kennedy was president. Now, after those two laws passed, he was assassinated 5 months later. Now, I'm not saying that's why he was assassinated. I'm just making an observation. Then you had Richard Nixon came in, and then Roe versus Wade was passed in 1973 that legalized abortions. Now, we've had over 60 million aborted babies since that time. And I remember God told Noah, and he told Adam, I want you to multiply upon the earth and raise godly offspring. But we've deprived 60 million young babies that opportunity to be productive in this society. He was impeached shortly thereafter, the next year. I'm not saying that's why, just making an observation. Then in 1980, Stone versus Graham, when Jimmy Carter was president, was the removal of the Ten Commandments in the classrooms. So we continued to scoot God away, straight arm him out of our national equation. And then in 2003, a state law, Lawrence versus Texas with George W. Bush, struck down sodomy laws in Texas, which by extension invalidated sodomy laws in 13 other states. And then we had President Barack Obama in 2013, United States versus Windsor, struck down the Defense of Marriage Act, DOMA. They could not defend the constitutionality of one man being married to one woman, which is biblical, right? One man should be married to one woman. Well, America could not define the constitutionality of that. And when you can't define the constitutionality of one man being married to one woman, you can redefine marriage. And they had Overfeld versus Hodges in 2015, approval of same-sex marriages. Now, once homosexuality has come into a country or an empire, if you look historically, it was always the final stage of the decline of that nation or that empire. And it never went away. You can't get rid of it. In fact, recently, Mattel, how many of you women in here have ever had a Barbie doll? You've heard of Barbie. She goes back as far as American Pie, right? Mattel just came out with a new transgender Barbie doll. Transgender Barbie doll. So it's crept into our society head over heels. At that same time, Obama got involved in the completion of the Iran nuclear deal with a rogue Islamic terrorist nation that wants to wipe Israel off the map. So what happens when you straight arm God away and push him away, you start getting what's called in Romans chapter 1, verses 24 through 32, the abandonment wrath of God. And it comes in 3 stages. He gives you over to the lust of the flesh, sexual perversion. He gives you over to vile passions, homosexuality, Romans 1:26. He gives you over to moral decadence, a debased mind, Romans 1:28. Giving over, and the Greek here is like letting a wild dog untrained off the leash and just letting him run rampant. And when a wild dog runs rampant for a period of time, he hooks up with a wild pack of dogs, and they start brutalizing and terrorizing a neighborhood. So that's what I think would be an example of what we got right now. Now what it says here is when you see these things happening, it means the Lord has already abandoned that nation. The Lord has already given it over to judgment. And the Lord is already revealing his wrath from heaven. So how could America decline? Here's some possible scenarios. Could it be international or domestic terrorism? Economic collapse? What about an EMP, electromagnetic pulse? Once upon a time, Newt Gingrich had come out and said this is the number one threat to the Department of Homeland Security. An electromagnetic pulse, for those who are not familiar with that, is a nuclear weapon. And it gets burst up at a certain burst altitude height, and it spreads out like a canopy, like a speed of light, and it fries everything electronic underneath it. So it's a nuclear weapon. Russia has it. China has it. Iran's developing it. North Korea has it. Places that don't like us. So if you burst an altitude of, if you do burst altitude of 30 miles, you could take out most of America. If you had a electromagnetic pulse, if you go higher up in the air, you can actually take out all of Canada and that sort of thing. So, I mean, I'm hoping that doesn't happen, but they do have these nuclear weapons, and they do understand what an EMP is. What about the rapture? What if Jesus Christ came, and this is what I'm hoping happens, and takes us out of here, okay? Well, who's going to get left behind in this country? The globalists, the liberals, the pro-abortion, the pro-homosexual, the antitheticals of biblical teaching. So we're going to go on with Ezekiel 38. Not the Israeli Defense Forces, not the American troops. They are stopped by God supernaturally through a great earthquake. And when the earthquake comes, every man's sword will start coming against their brother. Now remember, these are countries that Russia puts together that don't speak the same languages. And they're going to be killing each other when this great earthquake panics them. There'll be pestilence and bloodshed, flooding rains, great hailstones, and fire and brimstone. Now, I don't personally think the church is going to be here for this because this is about Israel. God's going to make his holy name known through his people Israel, but we could be here for this. But it's a pre-tribulation event. I'll show you that in a minute. Like the rapture is a pre-tribulation event. But someone will be here. Could you imagine seeing this? We watched Russia advance its troops around the borders of Ukraine. There are going to be news reporters watching Russia come. They're going to come from the outermost ports to the north with all this formidable troops. And the newscasters are going to be there watching this. Oh, they're coming after the livestock, the booty, the plunder. America and the UK are barking on the sidelines going, what are you doing, Russia? You're coming after our commercial interests? Back off. What are you doing? But they can't do anything about it. And Russia's coming down. The whole world's watching. They understand their motive. And all of a sudden, bam, a great earthquake. And they start killing each other. And there's pestilence and bloodshed and flooding rains and great hailstones and fire and brimstone. It's going to be clear to the onlooker that was not a normal victory fought militarily, but that the God of the Jews uphold his people. And that's when he says, I will make my holy name known in the midst of my people Israel, and I will not let them profane my holy name anymore. And the nation shall know that I am the Lord, the Holy One in Israel. Now, one of the reasons I think this is a pre-tribulation event, and I'll give you a stronger reason shortly, is because God's going to let the world know he's holy, he's the one true God, before the tribulation, because in the tribulation they're going to be given deception, and they're going to be given an antichrist who's going to try to convince people to follow him and worship him as God. So I don't think God is going to wait till everyone's getting the mark of the beast and this sort of thing and go, oy vey, I wish I would have done that sooner. God doesn't really do oy vey, that's sort of a Jewish thing. So in the aftermath, after God has stopped that supernaturally, that invasion, the Israelis will burn the weapons for 7 years. They'll convert them to fuel. I believe Russia's going to be bringing all of its powerful weapons, atomic, biological, and their hordes, chemical, biological. It's interesting that what we're told here is that those who live in the towns of Israel, these would be Jewish people, will go out and use the weapons for fuel and burn them up, the small and large shields, the bows and arrows, and wars, clubs and spears. For 7 years they will use them for fuel. They will not need to gather wood from the fields or cut it from the forest because they will use these weapons for fuel. Now, Ezekiel didn't know about nuclear weapons back then, so he was talking about the weapons of his time, bows and arrows and war clubs and things like that. Of course, you can't burn a bunch of bows and arrows for 7 years. They'd run out real quick, right? So he was trying to let us know that they'll be using the weapons of the enemies for fuel. They won't be burning wood, cutting down trees, which is what they used for their cooking and their heating and their energy sources back in the old days. So it's interesting to know that the technology to convert nuclear weapons into fuel and energy already exists, and America's been capitalizing on it for quite some time. Here's a few headlines. Megatons to megawatts, Russian warheads fuel U.S. power plants. NPR 2013. Power for U.S. from Russia's old nuclear weapons. New York Times, September 2009. Russian nuclear warheads provided electricity for the U.S. for 20 years. So Israel will know that technology. They'll know how to convert these weapons into fuel, etc. Now, this is one of the clues, the burning of the weapons for 7 years, that some of us believe also makes it a pre-tribulation event. Because you see an image up there of the timeline of the tribulation. If you understand the tribulation is compartmentalized in 3.5 years in the first half and 3.5 years in the second half. In the first half, Israel is enjoying a peace because it's been confirmed by the Antichrist. They feel like they're dwelling at peace for 3 years. They think they'll be dwelling in peace for 7 years, but it gets broken in the mid part. It's a pseudo-peace. So in other words, it's not going to last. But they could be burning and converting weapons into fuel for 3.5 years right there. But in the second half, even Jesus said when the Antichrist goes in the middle of the tribulation and he desecrates the temple, the abomination of desolation, he says, flee immediately, because the Antichrist is then going to try to commit genocide of the Jewish people. So they're not going to be burning weapons in the second half of the tribulation. They're going to be fleeing for their lives. If anything, they'd grab a weapon to defend themselves on the way to where they're supposed to go, which would be southern Jordan in the Petra area. So they could be burning weapons for the first 3.5 years before the tribulation. They could burn weapons for 3.5 years in the first part of the tribulation, but they would stop at the midpoint of the tribulation. So that's another argument with the weapons clue why this event finds fulfillment before the tribulation. And it goes on to talk about they'll have a burial ground for all these dead Magog invaders, the hordes of Gog, called the Valley of Hamon-Gog. They'll be burying the dead for 7 months, and Israel will gain world renown when the world sees this happen, them converting fuel to energy and burying these contaminated soldiers for 7 months. Hamon-Gog means the hordes of Gog. They're going to be burying them in a valley of Hamon-Gog, which doesn't exist just yet. But it will exist, obviously, in time for this to happen. So we're told that the Valley of Hamon-Gog is east of some sea that in a valley that obstructs travelers. So we have to say, well, where would that be on a modern-day map? Well, you've got the Mediterranean Sea, but east of that would be Israel proper, so you wouldn't be burying contaminated soldiers in the heartland of Israel. You got the Sea of Galilee, but to the east of that, there's really not a lot of valleys, and that's where Syria is, which is hostile to Israel. They're probably not going to transport all these bodies way down to the east of the Red Sea into Saudi Arabia. So the logical conclusion is east of the Dead Sea, which is Jordan, which is all perfect for burying a lot of people because it's just vast wasteland of valleys and desert. Israel will actually have control over Jordan by this time. I went through several prophecies on that over the weekend. Here's one of them just so you'll see. Israel's going to annex Jordan, according to Zephaniah 2, verses 8 and 9. I heard the reproach of Moab, which would be central Jordan, which I think the Valley of Hamon-Gog will be, and the insults of the people of Ammon, which is northern Jordan, which they have reproached my people and made arrogant threats against their borders. And because of that, the residue of my people shall plunder them, that would be the Israeli Defense Forces, and the remnant of my people shall possess them. The Israelis will then move in and expand territorially into Jordan, which Israel does when they win wars. Joshua did this 3,500 years ago. King David and King Solomon did it 3,000 years ago. Israel did it in 1967. So they would expand territorially. So the Valley of Hamon-Gog appears to be that it would be east of the Dead Sea. This would be my best suggestion on that, which also makes sense because Jesus said he anticipated the annexation of Jordan in Matthew 24, verses 15 through 16, when he said, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand. Let them who are in Judea flee to the mountains. And he's referring to the mountains in southern Jordan. So the faithful Jewish remnant in the midpoint of the trib will be able to flee because Israel has prior annexed this territory. If Israel had not priorly annexed this territory, this would be bad advice because Jordanians would not let 2 million or so Jews flee over in that area. But Jesus foreknew that Jordan would be under the possession of Israeli sovereignty at that time. Another clue that this prophecy of Ezekiel 38 is about to find fulfillment very soon is that it speaks to every sort of bird and to every beast of the field. Assemble yourselves and come together, gather together from all sides to my sacrificial meal, which I am sacrificing for you, a great sacrificial meal on the mountains of Israel, that you may eat flesh and drink the blood. So the hordes of Gog is going to be turned into a sacrificial meal. He's calling forward to every sort of bird and beast of the earth to assemble themselves to sacrifice. Now, when this happens, these birds can't be, flying from Canada or America or somewhere. It'll take weeks to get over there, right? They have to be on the site. They have to be on spot ready when this happens. Well, guess what? They're already there. Here's a few headlines. 2019, the Egyptian vultures returned to the Carmel Mountains after 60 years. May 21st, Vulture thought extinct from Israel for 30 years, spotted twice in a month. Jerusalem Post, 2017, the Israeli vulture population is on the rise. 2007, the Iraqi birds that made Aliyah. 2016, why Israel is a pilgrimage site for birds. 2017, Haaretz News, Israel's 500 million birds, the world's eighth wonder. So they're already there, which is another evidence that this prophecy is stage setting to find fulfillment very soon. So the outer ring, Ezekiel 38, as we summarize, is going to invade Israel for plunder and booty. It does not include any of the Psalm 83 countries. I believe Israel will have to deal with Psalm 83, the inner circle, the confederacy that comes against Israel, that the Israeli Defense Forces will defeat, so that Israel can dwell securely, tear down the walls, take over the spoils of war, and dwell securely. So these are two different prophecies distinctively. I believe that when these prophecies find fulfillment sequentially, Psalm 83 and Ezekiel 38, that Allah is going to lose his Akbar. So when a terrorist goes in to commit an act of terror, he shouts, Allahu Akbar. Our God is the greatest God, which is going to be proven to be false. So Psalm 83 involves 10 Muslim populations, Arabs that share common borders with Israel. When they get defeated by the IDF, there'll be a punch to the gut of Islam. Ezekiel 38 involves a lot of Muslim countries outside of the inner circle and the outer ring. We never cut to the jawbone of Islam. By the time the tribulation period starts, I think Islam will be knocked out for the 10 count. Now there's about 1.6 billion Muslims in the world, and about 600 to 800 million are in these areas. These are the core areas of Islam. But not all Muslims will be gone, but 600 to 800 million will be either killed, imprisoned, or exiled. And the people who are Muslims at that time are going to start questioning the strength of their God, the validity of their God. How come you couldn't defend our people against those Jewish people who Islam does not like? So Allah is going to lose his Akbar. So there's some differences, just as I summarized, between Psalm 83 and Ezekiel 38. That Psalm 83 includes Arabs versus Jews. Ezekiel 38 is mostly non-Arabs versus Jews. Got different enemies in inner circle versus an outer ring that don't share common borders. The goal of Psalm 83 is they want to take the land. They want to have a Palestinian state. The goal of Ezekiel 38 is to take prosperity and booty. The defeats of Psalm 83 are the Israeli Defense Forces who exist in fulfillment of Bible prophecy. The defeat of Ezekiel 38 is that the Lord supernaturally, as we saw, stops that to the wonder of the world. The different results will be an end of the ancient Arab hatred that's plagued the region since time immemorial. But the results of Ezekiel 38 is God has put the world on notice he's the one true God. So now let's take and answer that question I asked early. Why does Russia need to form such a massive coalition to invade little tiny Israel of today? Will it be a little tiny Israel after Psalm 83 and they expand territorially? So we look at the map of New Jersey. Let's say, again, Joe Biden. We need to stop whatever's going on in New Jersey. Let's get Canada and Mexico and the Bible, the Midwest part of America says, we don't need them. We can take out New Jersey. It's only 9,000 square miles. Come on, Joe. Well, let's say that they, and use the example of Psalm 83, the size of Israel, the size of New Jersey. Let's say that New Jersey actually wins that war and takes out all their neighboring states and takes over their police departments, their nuclear weapons and all that sort of stuff, all their plunder and their booty. Then you see why, then you see why they would need to call on Canada, more reinforcements, the rest of the United States, and Mexico. I think that's the scenario. I don't think the Israel of today is going to be the Israel of tomorrow. It's going to be greater, safer, and more powerful, and that's why Russia needs to bring so many hordes with them. Now, Israel becoming a greater, safer nation is in line with the promised land that God gave to Abraham in Genesis 15:18, which was, he said, I'll give to the descendants of Abraham this land from the river of Egypt, probably the Nile, to the great river Euphrates, which courses through modern-day Iraq and Syria. Now you could fit 36 Israels, the size of Israel today, into that area. And when Jesus Christ returns, he's going to give them all of that land so they can populate in the promised land, the chosen people. But I believe after these wars in Psalm 83, they're going to go ahead and take possession of these territories right here. And I showed this in the teaching over the weekend. You can watch those on YouTube. So this prophecy is the marquee event that God's going to use to make his holy name known. He's going to put the world on official notice. He's the one true God, and thank God for that, because after the rapture, things get really terrible. If you were here for my teachings, you know judgments are coming. Deception is going to be prevalent. People who get saved, people who we know right now, because we're so deep into the end times, who do not know Jesus Christ, who might get left behind, they've got to go through a perilous period of time. So we need to be aware of the fact the days in which we live in. We're seeing all the end time signs converging. We see the birds are already over in Israel. We see the Russian-Turkish Iranian relationships already forming. We see Israel on the grove with plunder and booty. I mean, so we're living in a time right now where biblical prophecies are about to find fulfillment. I wake up every morning wondering if one of these prophecies is going to find fulfillment, setting the stage for the final fulfillment of Ezekiel 38. These are all pre-tribulation prophecies. We could be here for some of these. We could even be here for this. So the goal here when you learn Bible prophecy is to, one, steward your life appropriately, prepare yourself for what's coming. Two, see what's going on in the world, understand the secular worldview and say, listen, I want to talk to you about the biblical narrative and the prophetic perspective. You see what's going on in Russia right now? Did you know they're in a major Bible prophecy written about 2,500 years ago? No, I didn't know that. Well, let me tell you about that, okay? So we are called to redeem the time right now. We don't want anyone to get left behind. I thank God for Pastor Claude, who is putting a fire underneath in your hearts to get you out there to witness to your loved ones. Not a lot of the churches are doing that right now. A lot of the churches don't even think we're in the end times. So I want to thank you for my time together.